Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Welcome to another amazing Saturday session. Tonight we are doing Surah 90 al-Balad and Surah 95 al-Teen. And these are two surahs that we previously did, but in the line-by-line surah format when we were back in Los Angeles in the early days, or actually maybe not the early days, but I think probably around 2018 or 19. And you can find that on our website and on YouTube. And significantly, we crossed the 100 surah mark tonight on our Project Illumine journey. So this constitutes surah 100 and 101, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. So that's a pretty crazy, amazing number. And that means that after tonight, we only have, like less than 13. We only have 13 left, which is really incredible. I can't quite get my brain around that. But, you know, there are some weeks that are just so special, so full of amazing content. My heart is so full. I wrote my weekly email. This week was my 29th convert anniversary on March 1st, which is also its own insanity because I don't know, like I always joke that I don't even feel like I'm 29 in real person years. So the fact that I'm 29 in my convert years, I mean, I'm aging myself, of course, but it's like, you know, the time just passes so quickly. And it's these milestones that really make you reflect because, you know, even where we are now, you know, we've crossed March and it wasn't like January 2023, like just last week. So it just really emphasizes the point of like how you know, critical it is to make every moment matter. And this week was one of these weeks that, you know, it's just like my heart is full because so many great things came out and they all happened to come out on my convert birthday. So I take that as a gift from God and I'm so grateful. One of the things is that as we've been talking about here, we had the full launch of Witzke's amazing album, Witness, which was Suli sponsored and we've been playing music from, and I've shared it on social media. Now you have 10 glorious songs and 2 glorious calls to prayer that you can just put on repeat. And I know people have been doing that and, you know, using that beautiful music to, you know, calm yourself, you know, escape the world, you know, find God. It's just been so lovely. And then on top of that, you know, I've been talking about this incredible 2-hour podcast that Witzke and I had. We recorded a conversation the day after we finished the full album in studio. And so it was a really exciting moment for us, and I really wanted to have that opportunity to just really talk about, you know, her music and what goes into it and what was inspiring the songs and just, you know, really have people have a full engagement. And that experience actually was much better than I could have ever anticipated. We talked for 2 hours. It felt like, you know, 5 minutes. And I said to her in the conversation that it was a bit of a religious experience because when you start understanding like what moves a person and what they pour into their music, and you know, as I've mentioned before, Witzke uses music to process a lot of things, and so when you start hearing that, and it's a very personal journey. You know, most artists don't like to talk about what goes into their music because it puts you in a very vulnerable place. And so I'm really grateful that she shared that because it was an incredible window into, you know, what this music represents and how much beauty really comes from that process and that, you know, passion for God and, you know, even like turning to God for comfort, inspiration, you know, just, you know, having that relationship. And so for us to be a part of that and understand what went into those songs was really special. And so that YouTube video is now shared on our channel. And if you go into, it's a long conversation, but if you go into the description, you'll see there are chapters. So we've broken it up into, you know, where she talks about certain songs. And there's a lot of really amazing information in between. But it's like, you know, it's a testament to the divine. And it's so beautiful. And it makes you hear the music in a very different way. Because when you know the story behind it, the thinking behind it, the feeling behind it, it just makes that much more special. So I really encourage people you know, to watch it in parts. It's also available just audio, so if you're driving and you want to, you know, have some company, Witzke and I are happy to go with you on a road trip, you know, so it'll be a really nice way to pass the time and really have a lovely educational experience. And also, what dropped this week, which was on my convert birthday, was this incredible conversation that Sheikh did with Momodou Tal on his podcast called The Malcolm Effect. And he did that last Sunday. So we didn't really know when it would come out. We were told it would come out, within 5 days or so, something like that. It happened to come out on Wednesday. And man, when I heard it, it was just, it was amazing. Like I said out, I put out in social media that, considering I've literally sat and listened to the vast majority of interviews that Sheikh has given over our, almost 30-year marriage. I mean, I've been, if not in person, I would listen to it afterwards. So it's I've heard just about everything, which I'm so grateful for. And this conversation with Momadou, for our time, for where we are, for the challenges we face as Muslims, for, what the world is like, this podcast, this, 1 hour conversation was everything that we need to hear. It's the comfort, the medicine, the inspiration, the education, the passion. It was so, and Momadou Tal is a wonderful, brilliant interlocutor. So he had the power of asking really good, insightful questions. A really smart guy. He's getting his PhD at Cornell right now. And he actually had done a previous podcast with Sheikh, I think a couple of years back, when he had a different podcast he was starting called Muslim Millennials. So that's also out there in the internet space somewhere. But so I just really encourage people, if you listen to no other podcast, Islamic podcast this year, listen to this because it is amazing. And they really cover a really broad range of topics, from, racism, obviously, Islamophobia, colonialism, and all of this stuff. And interestingly, we get a lot of questions about the whole issue of LGBTQ, feminism. Sheikh talks about those things, and it's a really beautiful, rational, just heartwarming, in so many ways, satisfying conversation. And he also talks about what's happening here at Usuli, what we've been doing, and how this journey with the Quran is significant and different from other tafsir in our tradition. So there's so much that is packed in that very short amount of time, and it's really brilliant. So definitely check that out. It's on our website. You can find the links there. You can find it in our weekly email and just on our social media in general. We've been sharing that around. And then, of course, last but not least, maybe not last, but yesterday's khutbah was, of course, out of this world again. It's called, or it's going to be called, it's not uploaded yet, but you'll find the live stream on. Where is the love? Where is the justice? Where is the ihsan? And Sheikh is amazing in talking about, again, the relationship of, when you're serving God, you're serving justice, and when you're serving justice, you're serving God. And then breaking down, literally, our understanding of ihsan, virtue, why we are where we are as Muslims, because we have lost that connection with ihsan. And it's a really powerful, really deep, again, khutbah, where it's an education in itself, right? Every single Friday, you get a whole education. And it's, yesterday was just another one of those incredible moments. I've gotten a lot of, actually, feedback, emails from people who just said it was brilliant and out of this world. So again, I would really encourage you guys to watch that. So so what I always, because we have to now appreciate this music, so the last thing before we go, I want to just play one song from Witzke's album, and it's significant because it was actually written for Usuli, and it's called Roots. And if you go to the YouTube discussion, you can click on that and find out more of the backstory of why she wrote it and what went into it. But it's a beautiful song, and the idea is it's like things are that here at Usuli, we do a lot of stuff, and that it's and we get a lot of hate, we get a lot of criticism, we get a lot of just negativity for a lot of different reasons. But what we do is, what we believe we do here is rooted in love, and that is, the lyrics talk about how when you're rooted in love, and it creates the branches and drops fruit. It's a beautiful song, and I'm so grateful because it comes from the heart, and I feel like so much of what we do here really comes from the heart and is rooted in love, and so it's a really appropriate song, and it's a blessing. So thank you, Witzke, for this song. I just want to play it so people can hear it, and then encourage you guys to listen to the rest of the album, and then I'm just going to play the audio, so.
We give our peace.
Oh, I don't know if you can hear
You
it.
give your aid. We call for change now. You'd rather wait You shoot enemy away. Where there is anger, there always is fear. Sealing the hearts so no one will hear. Where there is outrage, the truth is near. Contrast makes clear. The wind will keep on blowing, shaking up these woods. But like the best of words, our tree has grown firm roots. We are rooted in love, and our roots are enough to grow branches above. Sowing change as the fruits fall off. We tried to build, you tried to break. We tried to give, you only take. We are not perfect, for goodness sake. But your hatred is not our mistake. Where there is anger, there always is fear. Sealing the heart so no one will hear. Where there is outrage, the truth is near. Contrast makes clear. The wind will keep on blowing, shaking up these woods. But like the best of words, our tree has grown firm roots. We are rooted in love, and our roots are enough to grow branches above. Sowing change as the fruits fall. We are rooted in love, and our roots are enough to grow branches above. Sowing change as the fruits fall. Who knows what may come thereof?
One of the things that I absolutely love about this song, which Witzke talks about, is if you notice in the background where she's saying hua, 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 it's, you know, it's dhikr, and it's like a really important part of the song, and it's so beautiful. And then also, I will always remember when we were in the studio, and she has that Aretha moment, right, where she's like at the very end doing that really high, just beautiful belting. And I remember Joe and I were there, and we knew that it needed something, and we were like, okay, time for, you know, and she did it a couple of times, and then when she hit that Aretha moment, we were like high-fiving. We're like, yeah, that was it. So it's a very special memory that I'll always have in my mind's eye, and sometimes I just turn on the music and I just repeat that Aretha moment over and over again. So anyway, you know, this is the thing. You build a relationship with this music, and there are parts of it that touch your heart, because so much of it is also rooted in, you know, what we've talked about here. And, you know, there's a song called Hardship, where, you know, hardship with ease, right? And we have a chance to talk about how, you know, for us as Muslims, we understand that, you know, with hardship comes ease is this really powerful, you know, part of our tradition, and it's very much part of our faith. But for someone who doesn't know, you know, the Islamic tradition, they might hear that and go, oh, that's a really nice, you know, phrase, and it's like any other phrase that's very beautiful. But, you know, to have the ability to have a conversation and say, no, actually, this is very much part of the Quranic tradition, and, you know, there's a lot of profound beauty in it that arises from it, and that this song, even when you listen to it, it's like, sounds like it's coming from a well, which, you know, relates to the chorus. There's just so much beauty and depth, and so it just gives you a completely different appreciation for that mechanism, that vehicle of how you can convey, you know, remembrance of God, and, you know, and really pull people to another place. So anyway, thank you so much, Witzke, for that. It's so beautiful, and I hope people will enjoy it and listen to it again and again, especially when you need that comfort. So anyway, with that, I'm so proud of what we do here. Honestly, like this is one of these weeks where it's like everything was just like knocked out of the park. And so it feels so good. And it's so proud because, I feel like we do a lot of stuff that other Muslim spaces don't do or don't appreciate. And so when we have the freedom to do that ourselves and we knock it out of the park, it's a great feeling. And so I'm happy and proud that everyone who believes in what we do, we're here because you guys support it, and it's all our fruit, right? So may that fruit drop seeds everywhere and create some beauty in the future for all Muslims, inshallah. So with that, I'm so excited to continue on this journey, cross the 100 mark, and cover Surah Al-Balad and Surah Al-Teen. Thank you for joining us.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وسبحان الله العلي العظيم والحمد لله رب العالمين اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على الحبيب المصطفى محمد النبي الأمين المرسل رحمة للعالمين خاتم الرسل والأنبياء أجمعين وعلى آله الأطهار الميامين وعلى أصحابه الطيبين وعلى من اتبعوا بإحسان إلى يوم الدين اللهم اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي يا رب العالمين. Okay, so inshallah, Surah Al-Balad and Surah Al-Teen, Grace already mentioned this, but I'm just going to underscore it. If you listen to the line-by-line tafsir, you see that I go into all the different opinions and schools of thought and layers of meaning and all of that. And as is our custom, and as we've done before, this is going to just focus on the Illumine project approach, or my own engagement with the surah, and I'm not going to go over the material in the tradition itself. Okay, so both of these surah clearly belong to the Mecca period. Although, again, as often happens, we have these reports, outlier reports that will claim, and that does indeed claim that, especially Surah Al-Teen, that it is from the Medina period, but the support for these reports is seriously lacking. And the majority view in both cases, in both surah, the clear majority view is that these are Meccan surah. Surah Al-Teen probably was from the early Meccan period, while Surah Al-Balad was probably mid-Meccan period. And this is just a matter of naql, a matter of analyzing the various reports that say this surah came after this surah came after that surah, and so on, and trying to and working through the conflicting reports as well that you invariably run into. However, it really does not matter. Some surah, especially a lot of the surah in Medina, trying to come to some type of conclusion as to when precisely where they were revealed, does affect the analysis. But in both Surah Al-Balad and Al-Teen, other than knowing that they're Meccan surah and that they're from the first half of the Meccan period, and um, um, that's quite sufficient. And the reason that I say it's quite sufficient is that both of these surah belong to. It is not an exaggeration to say that the surah that in a very short space, a very limited narrative, lay the foundation for Islamic philosophy, lay the foundation for the moral outlook of Islam. And sort of both surah belong to these existential surah that address the essence and core of the moral path and the moral, how do you put it, the moral path and the moral charge that Muslims are wedded to and bound to. So we'll take Surah Al-Balad first, and then okay. So لا أقسم بهذا البلد وأنت حل بهذا البلد, the opening phrase of Surah Al-Balad. You know, there is this, and again, if you go to the line by line tafsir, I go into all the debate about whether the lam al-qasam, is this lam al-qasam or not lam al-qasam. You know, we don't need to get into that, but it's sufficient to say that Allah is, in fact, calling, or Allah is expressing an oath, and the subject of the oath here is هذا البلد. Now, we pause here for a second. When Allah says هذا البلد, this land, or this town, or the crux of the matter is, what does balad refer to? The majority, the clear majority, said that here Allah is swearing by Mecca itself, and that the oath is designed, again, like as the Quran has done before, to invite people, call upon people to reflect upon the central role of Mecca, this al-Balad al-Amin, this relatively secure and safe spot of land that unites the entire monotheistic tradition. There is a minority view that said what the oath here is not necessarily Mecca, but what Allah is saying is Allah is swearing by earth, saying, look upon this earth that you exist in, this earth, وَأَنْتَ حِلٌّ بِهَذَا الْبَلَدِ, that what this is saying is this earth that you are free to traverse upon. Um, what does Muhammad Asad do? Muhammad Asad says, "I call witness to this land which you art free to dwell." Um,
In the footnote, it says this earth.
so Muhammad Asad embraces the view that this land means it's this earth that you are free to dwell upon. Um, I mean, it is a defensible position. I'm not dismissive towards this view. Um, however, I think that I don't agree with this position, and the reason I don't agree with it is as we'll discuss, swearing by Mecca and the Prophet's presence in Mecca is material to the meaning of the surah. Okay, so first, so just keep this point in mind, and we'll come back to it. So there is an oath by this balad, and balad just means town or locality or a place. وأنت حل بهذا البلد. So وأنت, it could refer to Allah talking to the Prophet ﷺ and saying, and you and your place in this town, or your existence in this town, or as Muhammad Asad endorses the view, by the fact that I've given this land to you, right? Okay, ووالد وما ولد. I'm going to again skip over all the debates back and forth about verse 3 and say that the correct view, in my opinion, is that it is simply saying the cycle of life from parent to offspring, the dynamic of human continuation. Okay. Now, Surah Al-Balad is going to take us to say that consider the human condition, and it's going to say that there is a foundational moral challenge that either human beings succeed in meeting or fail in meeting. And in Surah Al-Balad, it is not just telling us reflect upon the fact, it is in fact telling us that you failed, or you completely undercut the purpose of your very existence unless you rise to these moral challenges, as we will see in a second. Now, why do I think that when Surah Al-Balad starts out by saying لا أقسم بهذا البلد وأنت حل بهذا البلد, why do I think that it is indeed referring to Mecca and not and to the Prophet's presence in Mecca, and not to earth and human beings being free to traverse the earth, or to dwell upon the earth, as Muhammad Asad puts it? Because Surah Al-Balad is going to set up a moral contrast about this remarkably special sacred space. It is as if it's saying, this sacred space of Mecca is supposed to set a moral example unto humanity. This sacred space in Mecca is supposed to be a beacon for the moral path. The moral path that Surah Al-Balad itself will elaborate upon. And that your presence in Mecca and your morality, the morality that you represent, Muhammad, contrasts very sharply with the moral failures of the people of Mecca. So let's take a step back again and go in order. So, an oath by the sacred space of Mecca. That sacred space has a function, like all sacred spaces. They are not simply a marginality. It's not just simply, by the way, oh, there's this sacred space. The sacred space is supposed to represent the existence of divinity in our midst. If you fail in all types of spaces, you should not fail when it comes to having a sacred space embody the moral path. And especially the presence of the Prophet ﷺ in Mecca and the moral path that he represents is going to be in sharp contrast with the what people in fact have done with the sacred space. In other words, the failures of human beings with the sacred space in Mecca. And then Allah says, okay, and reflecting upon the human cycle of parent and offspring, of what's the word I'm looking for? Reproduction or continuation. Left to its own devices. Space occupied by human beings who are reproducing results in what the natural tendency is لَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ فِي كَبَدٍ. That, let's see, that Muhammad Asad says, we have created man into a life of pain, toil, and trial. لَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ فِي كَبَدٍ. The grammar of the phrase itself connotes that human beings gravitate towards an existence that indeed is toilsome and that indeed could become a reproduction for its own sake. It's like the dreariness of existence. We exist because we exist. We reproduce because we reproduce. And the natural dynamics of that existence will naturally, through its own sunnah, result in a great deal of kabad, a great deal of burdens, hardship, pain, core to that existence that Allah describes as kabad, this toilsome existence, is that human beings, the natural processes of human beings, as is the natural processes that now have taken place in Mecca and taken hold of Mecca, that you, Muhammad, can clearly see, is that human beings become arrogant, and their relationship to material things bespeaks their state of being. And what is that state of being? Is that they feel, they become imbued with the attitude, is that I exist to gain and to earn. I exist to ahlaktu malan lubada, remarkable expression, to make money and to spend money. But أيحسب أن لا يقدر عليه أحد, that what that connotes is that it's not just that I make money, I spend money, but I am entitled to do so. It is, when I make the money, it's my money. And when I spend the money, it's my money. And it's no one's business how I make the money and how I spend the money. And in fact, the heart of the problem is that human beings, what they naturally gravitate to is to thinking that there are no consequences, no accountability. There will be no point in which they are going to be taken to task as to how they made the material things that they've made and how they expended the material things that they've expended. And that is precisely why أَيَحْسَبُ أَنْ لَمْ يَرَهُ أَحَدٌ, that God poses the rhetorical question that human beings in this state, indeed, their whole condition reflects the fact that they really do not think that there is an oversight. That it's like, if you are charged with an amana, with a trust, and there's oversight over you, the way you relate to this trust is very different than if you pretty much, the attitude is, well, this is my trust, I do with it as I please. And ultimately, there is no oversight. But what human beings consistently fail to see is that the reason they end up in a state of kabad, in the state of dreariness of existence, and the state where life itself becomes a chore, existing in this life and continuing on with this life for so many people become truly a chore, is because of this fundamental attitude towards material things. That it's mine, my relationship is the relationship of an absolute owner, not a trustee. I mean, try to, and subhanAllah, I mean, we know that the more people make, the more their sense of entitlement towards their relationship becomes. You try to intervene between someone and their money, and you will immediately be struck with this attitude that this is as a matter of entitlement. No one, I owe no one anything in terms of how I make and what I spend, as long as I can get away without oversight. I mean, it's one thing if someone thinks, okay, well, I might end up in prison if I mishandle my money. But if human beings they think they're safe from consequences, their relationship to material things becomes truly toxic. Okay. Then Surah Al-Balad poses, which unfortunately I don't think in Islamic history the proper moral weight was given to the term, this term Aqaba. So then Allah says, فَلَقْتَحَمَ الْعَقَبَةِ وَمَا أَدْرَاكَ مَا الْعَقَبَةِ. So it's as if Allah says, Al-Aqaba, how does Muhammad Asa translate it? He translates a steep uphill road. Al-Aqaba is whatever it is. The Aqaba is a term that you can give to any difficult, arduous, difficult, hard gateway to a thing. So it's like saying the true Aqaba before you means the true challenge before you. It is not just a challenge, but it is like what you must overcome to gain access to a great deal of good. So Aqaba in this context, when Allah says فَلَقْتَحَمَ الْعَقَبَةِ, human beings have failed to overcome the true moral challenge. In this context, the true moral challenge that would uplift human beings from the state of kabad. It's like saying you don't want to be among those who are caught in the cycle of moral obliviousness, moral absence, perhaps even moral deterioration, so that you end up in a state in which life for so many of you becomes toilsome, painful, and difficult. Then you must meet and overcome the true moral challenge. In fact, the true blockade. It's like there is something that blocks your path to moral enlightenment, and you must overcome what blocks your path to moral enlightenment. And then what Allah identifies as what blocks your path to moral enlightenment is astounding, because it tells you first, fakku raqaba. Fakku raqaba, most Quranic commentators, the vast majority, said fakku raqaba means that you free a slave from servitude, from slavery. And in fact, there are numerous ahadith in which the Prophet ﷺ says, "Man ataqa raqabata mu'minin فهي فكاكه من النار," that whoever will free a slave, they've escaped hellfire. That freeing a slave is your path to escaping hellfire. And even there's another hadith in which someone tells the Prophet ﷺ that I forgot what relation it was, my brother or my father died, and what can I do what can I do to help my deceased relative? And the Prophet ﷺ tells them, "اعتقوا عنه," meaning free a slave on his behalf. And in some versions of this, different versions of this hadith, the Prophet goes on to say that اعتقوا عنه, that by doing so, the hadith says, يعتق الله بكل عضو منه عضوا من النار, that it is as if when you free a slave on behalf of your loved one, every body part, it's odd in translation, but it makes sense in Arabic. Every body part that has been freed of the slave will save an equivalent body part from hellfire. So it's basically that by freeing a slave on behalf of your loved one, you are helping your loved one escape hellfire. So the hadiths on this are so numerous that they're undeniable. The critical idea is that if you want to overcome the true moral challenge, and it is such a significant step that in fact it draws you close to the path of salvation, so much so that, if you're a literalist, you'd say, oh, well, it's a sure way to escape hellfire. If you take it in context, as I do, that it greatly adds to your moral worth in the hereafter. But there is no reason that we limit fakku raqaba only to slavery. Because literally, fakku raqaba is, it literally, a person is bonded. The literal expression means bonding, a bond placed around the person's neck. And imagine all the ways that a bond is placed around a person's neck. I mean, in our day and age, you might say, well, there's no slavery. So what is, okay, so I have a deceased one who died, and the Prophet said, well, you could free a slave on their behalf. Well, there's no slavery today. But you could pay someone's debt off. That's unbonding. If this is a worthy moral situation, you could see someone that is bonded by debt, or someone who is in serious financial trouble and they're going to lose your home, and you free them from that burden, that's fakku raqaba. Even more significant, freeing someone from human trafficking. There are 50 million people who exist in slavery every year, and that's even a low number. Anytime you free a human being, and look at the way our minds have become, we tend to now go and look at the world of people who are bonded as somehow dirty and untouchable. No, look, Muslims in the United States or in the West will never think of freeing someone from bondage, going and helping addicts, freeing an addict from the bond of addiction. You've literally fakku raqaba. Saving a person who was forced into prostitution to feed her children, that's fakku raqaba. Now, even take you further. Imagine if you free a nation from dictatorship and authoritarianism. Imagine if you release thousands of political prisoners who are being tortured. Why isn't that fakku raqaba? Those who say whatever they want to say about slavery, and they love to go into history is elusive, because history is often written with political motivations and with material interests in mind. So much of what you read in history about, oh, this person owned slaves, this person owned slaves, and to pretend that this is not politically and ideologically motivated. What I know is Allah described to Muslims early on that you want the true moral challenge so that human beings don't end up in kabad. اقتحم العقبة وما أدراك ما العقبة فك رقبة. What I know is that Allah told them, freeing your slave is your path. And we have cumulative tons of reports of that the early Muslims made it their business to free slaves, and that this was so much so that it became one of the reason Islam was seen as a liberating force was because that's what the early Muslims did. Now, you get the traditions of imperial Islam that try to tell you that this companion had a slave, or this companion, or that the Prophet. I look with an eye of suspicion as to all of these traditions because they're politically motivated, ideologically motivated, materially motivated. Why? Because I know that the first empire of Islam needed an army of slaves. It needed slave labor. And so for someone to pretend that what my yardstick is the Quran, and for me to believe that Allah says, فَلَقْتَحَمَ الْعَقَبَةِ فَكُّ رَقَبَةِ, and that to know that the entire trajectory of the message of Muhammad ﷺ was to free people from ibadat al-ibad to ibadat Rabb al-ibad, from being enslaved to, instead of being enslaved to human beings, to be enslaved only to God. That's all I need to become extremely critical of all these reports that try to convince me that slavery was somehow okay. because it is God that said it's not okay. But even more than that, I have the right to look at the moral trajectory of Allah's message and to say, Allah told me from the very beginning that if I free people from bondage to other human beings, that this is the path to moral liberation so that we avoid the state of kabad. Now, lived experience shows me that I look upon authoritarian states and I see a state of kabad. I look at Iran and I see how miserable people are. I look at Saudi, I see how miserable people are. I look at Egypt and I see how miserable people are. Don't I have the right to then say, aha, Allah told me about this, and that if these people are liberated, the shackles around their neck are liberated, that this would be the path to avoiding the state of kabad? Do you see the moral power of the Quran? So Allah comes and says, okay, there is this aqaba, this true moral challenge. Who overcomes this moral challenge? Those who free people from bondage, all states of bondage. Who else? أو إطعام في يوم ذي مسغبة يتيما ذا مقربة أو مسكينا ذا متربة. Or those who stand by the orphan. So many orphans, there were no orphanages back then, were left under the charge of their kin. But we also know that so many orphans are mistreated under the charge of their kin. Moreover, a person who is in need because of hardship, especially the basic human right to not be hungry, put together these elements. What is Allah talking about? Allah is talking about the subordinated. In one word, subordinated people. If you uplift the subordinated, if you empower the disempowered, what is the proof of that? What is the proof of that? Proof of that is that Allah follows this and tells you, وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالْمَرْحَمَةِ. So the proof of that is that Allah comes and says, and the philosophy of your life, what you teach one another, the way that you educate one another, what you work with one another towards, is marhama, is an ethic of constant compassion, a social ethic of compassion. If you don't have compassion for one another, you are this people who are heading to kabad. But further, to teach one another sabr, perseverance and patience, which is the contrast to entitlement. So many people have no patience because they're entitled. They want what they want and they want it now. If it's patience without compassion, care, it becomes oppression. Patience without care, then you're just saying, you're oppressed, endure it. That's not the answer. If it's compassion, care without patience, it becomes entitlement. You need both. And when Allah then says, أُولَٰئِكَ أَصْحَابُ الْمَيْمَنَةِ وَالَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا بِآيَاتِنَا هُمْ أَصْحَابُ الْمَشْأَمَةِ عَلَيْهِمْ نَارٌ مُؤْصَدَةٌ. That أُولَٰئِكَ أَصْحَابُ الْمَيْمَنَةِ, those are the people of the right path, the right moral path. وَأُولَٰئِكَ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا بِآيَاتِنَا, meaning those who've rejected what ayat. It's not just I don't believe in the Quran, but kafaru bi ayatina, who rejected Allah's teaching of the moral path. So kafaru bi ayatina, it could be you're a Muslim, but you are not someone who has tawasi bil marhama. You are completely oblivious to compassion and completely oblivious to patience. And you are a Muslim who's entitled, and a Muslim who thinks whatever money you have is yours, and no one has any business and any right to make any demand. And you hardly think of the subordinated and the disempowered or of bonded people. You are a kafir bi ayatillah. And that is why أولئك أصحاب المشأمة, you are on the wrong moral path. It's not the fact that you say, I am a believer. الميمنة والمشأمة, the right moral path, the wrong moral path, and the warning that Allah gives you. Now, عليهم نار مؤصدة. Of course, Allah is warning you that you are on the wrong moral path. The consequences in the hereafter could very well be that Allah takes you, holds you responsible and accountable for all your sins, and you pay for it. But furthermore, alayhim narun mu'sada, is that the nar al-mu'sada, this sustained hellish condition that is the consequence. It could also be the consequences of ignoring God's moral path on this earth. So, the sacred space of Mecca is supposed to have, Mecca, by the very fact that it is the space of monotheism and the role of sacred spaces in embodying the attributes of divinity. And the fact that the Prophet ﷺ there, the teacher of the moral path, contrasts with the people of Mecca who in fact procreate but have exactly exemplify what is wrong with human being procreating for the sake of procreation, existing for the sake of existence. In other words, the philosophy of existentialism. And who have repeatedly, for many centuries ago, have failed the moral challenge because there are tons of people in Mecca who are oppressed orphans, oppressed needy, and oppressed bonded human beings, bonded legally and economically. And the charge of the Prophet ﷺ is to liberate these people. And this is precisely what the Prophet ﷺ does. You see, Surah Al-Balad is nothing short than the constitutional anchoring of the legacy of the Prophet ﷺ and his followers. So when you tell the story of the Prophet, when you tell the Sunnah of the Prophet, and you tell it as if it was about how many times he prayed Sunnah after Dhuhr, or as if it was about, how he drank his water, or as if it was about whether, all the minutia, you completely miss the point that from the very beginning, as Surah Al-Balad puts us on notice, this is a message of moral liberation and the breaking of human bondage. Now, the challenge from that message to the Prophet at the time, it's ongoing in perpetuity. Because at any point in time, Muslims then must look at the sacred space. Does it embody the morality of Islam? The sacred space of Mecca? And look at their own spaces. Are they the people who are in kabad? Or are they the people who are iqtaham al-aqaba? Who have broken through the moral challenge? It's as simple as that. All the rest, you see, all the rest are details. When people say, he doesn't follow in my view, I follow the Sunnah far more authentically and truthfully than all these robots that are like monotones, read hadith but don't understand what the heck they're reading. Because the true representation of the Sunnah, of the message, of the essence, of the spirit, of the philosophy of the Prophet ﷺ was summed up into these two words, iqtaham al-aqaba. That's it. Human beings come, there's a true moral blockage. It's like a firm, it's like itself, a chain that they must break through. The chain from moral ignorance and moral apathy to full moral consciousness. It's like coming out of Plato's cave. Those who imagine that they can follow the Prophet and remain in the cave of darkness, of jahiliyyah, of ignorance, completely miss the point of the message of the Prophet of Islam. The Sunnah of the Prophet of Islam was to take you out of the cave. So it's and it is the substance. Allah will always, and this is a very old issue in the Islamic civilization. It's not something that I've invented or even that. When Allah decides who is worthy of divine support, Allah will look to which people relatively have achieved a greater degree of breaking the bondage or breaking the bonds of servitude, because that's the aqaba. And the more people have failed in their moral duty to challenge the bondage of servitude, the further away from the path of Islam they are. I should also tell you that the Prophet ﷺ, in commenting on, there are many ahadiths where he comments on Surah Al-Balad, and especially not just Surah Al-Balad, but on the Quranic teaching of tawasaw bil marhama, where so many, I mean, it reaches the point of a tawatur, because tawatur meaning, in this case, equal to the authenticity of the Quran itself, where the Prophet in so many different versions says, Ar-Rahimuna yarhamumullah, or La yarhamullah man la yarhamun nas, that if you want Allah's rahmah, if you want Allah's mercy and compassion, you must extend mercy and compassion to human beings. And in fact, as the Prophet ﷺ says, that those who do not have mercy and compassion towards other human beings should not expect mercy and compassion from Allah. So this is another thing that we do not raise our children on, that the extent to which the gates of heaven open up to your dua, the extent to which your place is elevated vis-a-vis the divine, the extent to which you are closer to divinity, is not in relation to the amount of dhikr you do, or the number of times you just recite the Quran without comprehension. It is in direct relation to your treatment of other human beings. In a word, service. What you do. If you have no grounds to stand on in terms of expecting compassion, rahmah, this greatly undervalued virtue. If you do not extend it to others, and this is core to the teachings of the Prophet. Again, I go back to this idea of sunnah. How many people have you seen have epileptic fits because they see someone that supposedly, or has contravened the sunnah at this point, but they are not, you cannot describe them as compassionate. Because what is a compassionate human being? It's a loving human being. Have you ever met a person who is compassionate but not loving? It's impossible. Compassion is a tenderness of the heart. Compassion is an emotion in which you care. And in order to care is one of the basic constituent elements of love. So when the Prophet ﷺ tells us, and here is elaborating about what Allah told us, tawasaw bil marhama, that in order to be a people, because listen, you're not going to release people of their bondage if you think of it as a legal duty. If it's a legal duty, you might do it once, you might do it twice, but you do it, but you have no passion for it. The passion for freeing people from bondage comes from caring. And that passion is the marhama. Because you are driven by that passion of care. I have compassion for other human beings. And so I'm not doing it as a matter of fulfillment of a strict legal obligation, which any fulfillment of a legal obligation is a chore. But it's not a chore if you actually care. Um, the other, from the hadith tradition that I should tell you, is that a man, there are many versions of the same elements of the narrative. That a man approaches the Prophet ﷺ and says to him that I basically that I want to أقتحم العقبة, that I want to overcome, reach that stage, and that I can't free a slave. I don't have a slave to free, and I don't have now in this all the different versions. The essence of what the Prophet ﷺ reportedly says is the following: إن لم تطق ذلك فاطعم الجائع واسقي الظمآن وأمر بالمعروف وانهى عن المنكر فإن لم تطق ذلك فكف لسانك إلا من الخير. So the essence of the teaching is what's significant here, not the many different versions, but that, okay, the moral obligation, and it's all under this rubric of اقتحام العقبة, of overcoming the moral blockade that you must break through, is that you feed the hungry, and you quench the thirst of the thirsty, and وَأْمُرْ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ, and you enjoin the good, وَانْهَ عَنِ الْمُنْكَرِ, and you resist what is evil. And if all else fails, then at the very minimum, don't say anything except what is good. Now, there's a lot one can say about this genre of reports, but what the gist of it is that they're effectively saying that you have a constant active moral duty to engage the moral path. And in effect, this is sort of a typically medieval way of saying, if you are truly so powerless that you cannot effect change, then at least become a constant advocate for what is morally upright. But of course, as I keep saying in so many of my khutbahs, that you cannot be an advocate for what's morally upright unless you can recognize morality. If unless you can recognize that freeing people from bondage is a moral good. And at the bare minimum, watch your mouth. At the bare minimum, don't be someone who perpetuates evil or the demonic through your speech. And life has taught me, when I was young and I would read these traditions, I would always think to myself, is this really a challenge to only speak good? I mean, really, seriously, there's so many hadiths in which the Prophet ﷺ is counseling and teaching the same thing. And I would think to myself, is this really a challenge? And then life has taught me it is such an enormous challenge. In fact, one of the what people choose to speak about is a reflection of what they value, what they celebrate, what they perpetuate, what they demean, what they detract, and because we are social animals, we are very much affected by what people say to us and what people say about us. But it is not just what people say to us and what people say about us, but what we in our speech patterns give value to and celebrate, and what we in our speech patterns demean and degrade. So life has taught me that when we honor certain social insignia, it's nothing but speech. Put differently, when we say such and such degree is impressive, that's speech. That's speaking. We chat with each other and we're impressed by something and we're not impressed by something. That communicates meaning and value. When we say this is the type of person you marry, this is not the type of person you marry, that's speech. We are constantly socially communicating. We're impressed by this choice, we're not impressed by this choice. We are constantly creating and supporting the construction of values. When we talk and say something like, freedom is important, liberty is important, or we don't talk about liberty as important, it's speech. So much of what it turns out that we do is speech. So when my understanding of the Prophet ﷺ, when he says, فَكُفَّ لِسَانَكَ إِلَّا مِنْ خَيْرٍ, that don't allow your tongue to say anything but what is khair, what is good. It's only took ages to truly understand the depth of this advice. Because through our speech, we can reinforce superficiality. We can make what is superficial the center of the universe, or we can do the opposite. Through our speech, we can elevate what is wrong, or we can degrade what is right. Subhanallah, I mean, and that is why when I've always, this expression, tawasaw, because tawasaw linguistically means not just in action, but what you constantly talk about. So tawasaw is like what you counsel one another about. Tawasaw bil sabr wa tawasaw bil marhama. It's as if what you choose to talk about, what you choose to endorse, what you choose to approve of in your speech, in your communications, is to counsel one another, to advise one another, to bolster one another, to support one another. About what? About sabr. So when someone comes and you say, oh, no, oh, you're entitled to much better than that. Oh, you should be making much more money. Ask yourself, are you counseling sabr or are you counseling entitlement? Because if you truly believe you are going to be held to account, there's moral responsibility in the hereafter for whatever you say. And do you counsel one another towards marhama? Because that's a real question. Do you actually think of what mercy and compassion, what goodness calls for, what is beautifully good calls for? And is that what you advocate? Or because we often, the temptation is to cater to the lowest base of one another's ego. And the way we often, the cheap way of gaining friendship, the cheap way of gaining friendship and gaining favor with human beings, please listen to what I'm saying. Please reflect upon what I'm saying. The cheap way of gaining favor is to support the sense of outrage. That is the cheapest, most base way. It's immorally base, decrepit way. You support their sense of outrage. The vast majority of times, 99.9% of the time, it's not because we have contemplated the true vestiges of justice, but simply because outrage comes from egoism. And we constantly, the way we tell someone, see, I'm on your side, is to say, yes, you have a right to be outraged. Be angry. Be livid. It is so much harder to counsel al-marhama, sabr and marhama. And it's so much harder because in a morally decrepit society, you're going to end up a loner. You're going to end up alone. But it's a choice you have to make. Okay, what time is it? Okay. Now, as to Surah Al-Tin, subhanallah, it's another foundational surah, but from a different angle. And again, if you listen to the line-by-line tafsir, you'll see I go into great detail about all the different schools of thought, about Tini wa Zaytun, wa Turi Sinin, and what different people said about. But anyway, but again, we see Allah alerting us to the function of sacred space. Sacred space that Allah shares with us, our physical presence. And it is not, it's sacred space, it's a reminder. I mean, of course, we use sacred space completely in the wrong way, because we think we completely forgot all the Islamic jurisprudence that tells us sacred space, you can't change the topography. You can't kill animals. You're not free to do with sacred space as you will. But look at what we did with Mecca and Medina. I mean, it tells you to the extent to which we've deviated. Sacred space, it means that Allah is telling you, you can't treat all spaces as if you're entitled. And it's a strong reminder. But here with Tini wa Zaytun, to make a long story short, I believe that Tin wa Zaytun is a clear reference to the land of Palestine. All the long-winded debates about, no, Tin wa Zaytun, in my view, and why the land of Palestine? Because what arose from the land of Palestine is a constant line of prophets, of course the most famous of which is Isa, alayhi salatu wassalam. But the land of Yahya as well, but a long history. This is the land of the prophets of Tawheed. For Muslims, Palestine is the land of Tawheed. It is not the land of Jews because it cannot be the land of a chosen people. It is the land of those who follow at-Tawheed, follow monotheism. Allah al-Wahid, who looks upon entire humanity as Allah's children, no chosen anything. So Allah reminds us, swears by Tinu wa Zaytun, the land of Palestine, wa Tur Sinin, the land of the momentous encounter between Musa alayhi salam and the receiving of the Ten Commandments, the receiving of the divine writ, the divine law, the core backbone moral law given to humanity. وَهَذَا الْبَلَدِ الْأَمِينَ, and then this sacred or this blessed land that Allah has made safe, as we said before, all around Arabia there is violence and abductions and so on, but the miracle of Allah making Mecca a safe zone, and the imperative of maintaining Mecca as al-Balad al-Amin, the land of safety. I mean, if you are in Mecca and you are afraid that you say the wrong thing and you're going to be arrested and made to disappear, that's not amn. To me, that's not safety. That is so. To have a Gestapo-like force in ruling over Mecca is as opposite of an Amin as you can get. But so Allah, swearing by these localities, is Allah saying, look, whether the land of Palestine, some scholars said, and in fact, well, actually, 1 second, did I write it down or did I forget? Like Ibn Zayd and Ibn Abbas both said that Tini wa Zaytun refers specifically to Bayt al-Maqdis, to the Dome of the Rock, the mosque in the blessed locality, whether it's Palestine or Bayt al-Maqdis, but the whether it is the sacred land of Isa alayhi salam or Musa alayhi salam or Muhammad alayhi salam, there is a core message, a core moral path to humanity. لقد خلقنا الإنسان في أحسن تقويم. We created, Muhammad Asad says, we created man in the best conformation. Oh, interesting. Probably he chose the word conformation that there's an old I don't know what to call it, philosophy or theory, is that the human beings were created in the best shape for the tasks at hand. The idea of conformation is that they're apt to do what they need to do. I don't take a position on this type of this, but anyway, لقد خلقنا, the way I understand it is that لقد خلقنا الإنسان في أحسن تقويم, is that we created human beings with the best possible potentialities. A lot of commentators say, it means that, human beings were created upright, and if you go line by line tafsir, I go through all of these, and I don't actually express what my beliefs are at all in the line by line tafsir. But my view is that لَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ فِي أَحْسَنِ تَقْوِيمٍ, that a human being was created with the best moral potentiality. human beings, the miraculous creation of a human being, the true miracle is not limited to their physical appearance, 2 legs, 2 arms, so on, but that, as in Surah Al-Balad, Alam naj'al lahu aynayn wa lisanan wa shafatayn, that we gave him 2 eyes and a tongue. But it is not just the physical attributes, but the moral potentiality, the human being that is capable of reaching the type of spiritual elevation that we have examples of, such astounding levels of moral elevation and such astounding levels of moral and ethical consciousness. That is the Ahsan Taqweem. Now, ثُمَّ رَدَدْنَاهُ أَسْفَلَ سَافِلِينَ. But human beings, of course, Allah often attributes the moral choices of human beings to Allah's self, because all ability comes from God. That's a bigger philosophical question. But the Quran often talks, meaning that you make the choice, and once you make the choice, the power to carry out the choice, that power, the base of that power, is because of the creation that Allah makes possible. So, although it says ثُمَّ رَدَدْنَاهُ أَسْفَلَ سَافِلِينَ, some commentators said Allah is talking about how human beings are born in good health and they're vibrant and lively and so on, and then they age and they become decrepit and fall apart and sick and so on. I don't think that's not the understanding that. Although again I discussed it in the tafsir, but let's stick with. So that was the strongest moral potentiality. But human beings are capable, and often do, and persistently do, reduce themselves asfal safilin, to a very lowly status, that you can take yourself from this great moral potential, the moral potential that is realizable by, Rab'a al-Adawiyya, for instance, in her incredible insights about the divine. But yet, human beings consistently take themselves to the lowest of the low. As the Quran says elsewhere, they become as if cattle, or even worse than cattle, unthinking, without moral reflection, without moral. Now, then Allah says, but that path of lowliness, I guess that's why Surah 18 was coupled with Surah Al-Balad, because it has this synergy. But then the path of moral deterioration is indeed avoidable. And it's avoidable by those who believe in the moral path and آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات. Now, they both believe and they persist in acts of goodness. فَلَهُمْ أَجْرٌ غَيْرُ مَمْنُونَ. Now, to add to those people, the reward is endless. That they earn favor. It's like Allah saying, that's what I care about, is the belief and the good deeds. فَمَا يُكَذِّبُكَ بَعْدُ بِالدِّينِ. Here, early on, in this context, a deen, although many commentators said it's Islam, a deen in this context, like so much of the very early Meccan Quran, a deen is a reference to the moral path that is the opposite of moral deterioration. So, what is the deen here? The deen, أَلَيْسَ اللَّهُ بِأَحْكَمِ الْحَاكِمِينَ, that the belief in fact, in judgment, and that the belief that God is a judge who is just and the most just. Now, the significance of this is that the deen of so many at the time of the time that the Quran is revealed, and centuries before the Quran revealed, I mean, and going back hundreds and hundreds of centuries, the deen of so many human beings is a God that is not just. We just don't realize what it took for human beings to come to the conclusion that God has to be just. The idea that a God that is overcome by favoritism of a class of people, or a God that is overcome, if you've read the Old Testament, a God that is overcome by jealousy, a God overcome by emotions of one kind or another, gods that compete with other gods, gods that wrestle with other gods, and so on. So, believing that there is a moral path, and that the moral path is a moral path of justice, like I was talking about in yesterday's khutbah, and that God is committed to the principle of justice, and that is the deen. That it is not your status, it is not your position, it is not your genealogy, it is not, because these were all. But we often talk about these things as if they're things in the past, and then a lot of times when I'm praying when I'm especially studying the Quran and praying on the Quran, I always get this feeling time and time again, especially in sujood. It's as if Allah invites me to reflect whether human beings truly have overcome their inability to understand what it means to worship a just God. Because look at the way that human beings, I mean, like, take for instance the way we use the word shahada. Often the way what we decide to call a martyr or not a martyr depends on our political allegiances. And I still remember when, of course I was young, but when during the Iran war, we were in Kuwait, at least for the war lasted for 10 years, so we were in Kuwait for part of these 10 years, and we would get Iraqi TV, and Iraqi TV was constantly referred to anyone killed on the Iraqi side as shaheed this and shaheed, the martyr such and the martyr such. And you wonder, Muslim killing a Muslim. How is a just God going to be? Is it just because you belong to Saddam Hussein and to Iraq? You're the martyr, and you find this even today, like when Egyptians in the Sisi's army claims that it's fighting terrorists in Sina, and it's frequently kills people of Sina left and right, horrible human atrocities. But any soldier who dies in the Egyptian army is immediately declared to be a shaheed, and the entire Egyptian people, including Azhar, refer to their soldiers who are killed fighting fellow Muslims and brutalizing the people of Sina as martyrs. Do we really believe that Allah is Ahkam al-Hakimin? If you have 100 million people in Egypt thinking that Allah is on the side of the Egyptian government, and so I'm not sure we ever overcame our paganistic tendencies to think of God in very vulgar human terms. And it takes a considerable act of moral enlightenment and courage to get beyond human egoisms and nationalisms and loyalties, and to truly ask the question of justice and God. The whole subject of yesterday's khutbah, justice and God. So, backtrack so I can close, and let's just make sure before I close I didn't forget anything. Yeah, an interesting point that in the Torah, in the Old Testament, I don't remember which chapter. I didn't have time to find it, but it's towards the end of the Old Testament. The Old Testament itself mentions at one point Tur Sinai. In Hebrew, it's Sa'ir. Sa'ir is the lands of Isa, of Jesus, and Jibal Farran, the mountains of Farran, and that's Jibal Farran are the mountains of Mecca, of Muhammad. So it's very interesting that in the Old Testament there's also a reference to these three sacred spaces: Sa'ir, Jibal Sina, and Jibal Farran. Which, I mean, Surah Al-Tin, of course, okay, so as foundational Quranic surah for the early Muslims and sort of laying the foundation upon which Islam is to be built, it comes in and anchors Muslims in the awareness that Islam is about a moral path. And in Surah Al-Balad, the moral path is to overcome the true moral challenge of care, compassion, and liberation. And in Surah Al-Tin, to overcome the egoism of thinking of God in terms of God is just if God is on my side, and to think of God in terms of real justice, and that the Iman is to embrace the moral path, and with embracing the embracing of the moral path is meaningless unless it is translated in constant performance of good deeds. Foundational surah upon which everything else is built. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. These are Al-Balad and Al-Tin.
Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I never have the words, the proper words to express the profound gratitude for these sessions. And, it's so beautiful but different going through them again, because, we spent hours going through the line by line tradition. And it's amazing to look back and think that you went through these surahs before and didn't share what your own, conviction is about the meaning. And then when we actually hear it, it resonates, it hits you, deep inside. You just feel the truth of it. And it's just so powerful and meaningful and valuable, because I don't know, how else would we get this and understand it. For example, again, I'll just read the very short descriptions that are provided in, this is Abdul Halim's translation, at the beginning of each surah. For Surah Al-Balad, it says, revealed in Mecca, the point of this surah is that man is created to work and be judged. He should therefore seek to do good deeds rather than indulge in arrogance and wastefulness. And then for Al-Tin, a Meccan surah questioning how man can deny the judgment and emphasizing the importance of faith and good deeds, which is so true. But you just, when you go so much deeper in, and really just peel it apart and take us through. It's just, I don't know, it's hard to describe the gratitude for the depth of understanding, and how it's transformative to our life, because we recognize it in ourselves, we recognize it in the people around us, in our world around us, and how meaningful they are, especially as things have become so dark. And for me personally, I think it's so painful when you talk about, this is referring to the land of Palestine or the sacred spaces of Mecca, and you contemplate what's happened to those spaces today. And it just reminds me that, in previous surahs you've said that, what happens from here, or what we receive today, is from the accumulation of a lack of action or a lack of apathy, or, what was not done before our time. And then the burden of what we do now is going to affect, tremendously, directly, what goes forward. And so when we receive this type of knowledge, and you recognize the state of affairs for Muslims, it just underscores, one, how important this work is, how transformative, but also the burden of responsibility that if this stops here, then what is prevented in the future, and what are we going to be held accountable for? So I pray that those of us who recognize this, the power of this learning, really, take it upon yourself, to share with others, and try, it's just to know how important it is that what we do now matters for the future, very, very directly. And, what also just struck me as you were going through the surahs is, when we get to the verses about the consequences of what happens, and most people thinking that, the Quran is telling us the consequences of the hereafter, that the fire is coming, or this or that, the other thing. But, we understand now that the Quran is a very vibrant message, and that this is not just what's going to happen in the hereafter, but as you said, in this life. So, both on the side of either, if you're living in this kind of existence of just your, procreating to procreate, existing to exist, you're kind of in this darkness. I mean, that's its own hell, right? Or conversely, the people who do so much good get the reward of a lot of good in this life as well. And it makes a difference, especially for someone who is a convert, who lived that in that darkness for so long. I know what that means when you say you're just in this existential, conveyor belt, right? And the days don't really change. But then when you actually make the decision to choose a different life, which is on this path of goodness, where now you commit to something that is light, then that changes your entire existence in this world. Not even to worry about what happens after, but it, materially changes your world here. And so recognizing that in these surahs is so powerful. And so thank you so much. And again, there are just not enough words to express, my gratitude personally, but I'm sure everyone. So alhamdulillah, thank you, Sheikh. And I'm wondering if maybe, as usual, we could start by, asking you to reflect on your journey with these surahs. I know they're probably early, in the early age, but if whatever, like if you could share with us what occupied you, where you were, what you were thinking, when did you have those aha moments?
Yeah, I mean, it was very early because I remember teen was among the first surah that I took on. A teen, I mean, because it's one of these surah that is among the first surah that you learn of the Quran, that you repeat so often. I guess the main thing is that it's always أليس الله بأحكم الحاكمين. I mean, the traditional learning is that you learn that it's a rhetorical question, as if God is saying, isn't the fact that God will reward those who believe and do good deeds, isn't that fact proof that God is the most wise of judges, or the and that's sort of what and it never sat well with me. I mean, okay, so why is the fact that to really understand or appreciate the idea that, well, God created human beings in the best of form, and then human beings will deteriorate, and then that exception, إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا, except for those who believe and do good deeds, God will reward them. So isn't that fact proof that God is the most wise of judges, the wisest of judges? It didn't gel. Okay, so what is the connection between God creating people in the best of form and then people growing old and so on? So when the journey with it is to sort of disabuse yourself of the modern normal discourse on what you normally just are told about what the surah means, and to broaden your horizons and seeing what type of debates and ideas the surah generated. And so it became that fell into place fairly quickly. It wasn't a difficult surah. I mean, it became very clear once you've read enough that the challenge of truly believing in a just God, and how much of a challenge it is to really accept the God wedded to the concept of justice, and the extent to which understanding justice is critical to understanding God, and understanding God is critical to understanding justice. And then that just opens literally oceans of knowledge and inquiry, because then you discover that there is a very extensive philosophical tradition on the relationship between the divine and justice, and whether a person, to put it very bluntly, whether a person who doesn't have a, 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 a truthful sense of justice can really have a truthful sense of God, or whether a person who has a relationship with God or has a truthful, genuine relationship with God can be oblivious to justice. And, that's it. You discover that in our modern age, for largely because of the political challenges that or the political problems that Muslims confront, the extent to which this discourse has been suppressed and muted, that they don't, I mean, I remember, like, when we started asking my shuyukh about, my teachers, about such and such, I read this passage that said this, and the discomfort about, well, so what does that mean? So if I see these people who claim to be pious, because we're talking about some Azhari shuyukh and so on who are supposedly have a very intimate relationship with God, but their sense of justice is completely absent. They don't think about justice. They don't advocate justice. They don't care about justice. And to ask that very tough question, well, what does that tell me about their piety? And what does that tell me about my attempt to be pious? And then you discover how hard that question is. I mean, you sort of start with thinking that you're taking, oh yeah, sure, I want to understand the surah, but then you discover that you've opened up the floodgates to a world of nuance, a world of philosophy, a world of morality, a world of a world in which you are effectively seen as being a troublemaker, because you're opening up the doors on things that modern Muslims have sort of shut the door on. Or, they much rather be having a discussion on, where you put your hands when you're praying or something like that. And with these foundational surah, especially because these are, the first Quran people were receiving, and the first Quran people were memorizing, the first Quran people were reciting, and for a very long time, that was the Quran, long before any of the ayat on ahkam. It is, and then it dawns on you that and that is why it dawns on you that God was laying a foundation. It's like you cannot handle the law unless first you are anchored in these philosophical pillars. And then you realize why there was such a problem with hypocrites later on in Islam. Because those who came to the religion, not having been trained in these foundations, they were of a very different quality than the early converts who lived with Surah At-Tin for a decade before ever receiving anything about laws. Um, Surah Al-Balad, I mean, it must have been months later, maybe a year later. I don't remember, but it was sometime later in Surah Al-Balad. Um, but that oath, لا أقسم بهذا البلد وأنت حل بهذا البلد ووالد وما ولد. This opening ayat and the oath, and the term Aqaba is a very big term. I mean, it's like saying you have not overcome the obstacle. So why is God describing these things, the freeing of someone from bondage or the orphan, as the obstacle? And the obstacle to what? And why is it that we are in lived Islam, we are often, that notion of an obstacle, the obstacle, the aqaba, is not emphasized. I mean, in fact, we are given the impression that you can attain faith, you can grow close to Allah without even having to encounter these obstacles. But Surah Al-Balad describes this as the obstacle. And fully investigating that one word, Aqaba, the obstacle, and why God describes it as the obstacle, and an obstacle of what, to what. And what if you are and because this is the part that comes from a mind that asks questions, and just doesn't accept whatever is just received, is that what if I am a Muslim who is very pious, believes, and so on and so forth, but I never really think about these obstacles, that there are people who are around me who are in bondage all the time, everywhere. And especially, I remember where I grew up, a lot of families had little servant girls working in the home as cleaners. You know, these are children that come from the villages, and they stay with the family, and their job is they don't go to school. They're treated as subservient, as subordinate beings. They're usually sleep in the kitchen or on the floor somewhere or so on, not on the bed, and they're not allowed to sit on the furniture. And their job is to clean, and that's what they do. They're called maids, right? And I just remember this very well. Is that I would think back about the so many of the pious houses that I knew in my childhood that had these little maids, and the maids that were not, would not eat with the family, would not sleep on beds, would not allow to be sit on chairs or sofas, and I would think, okay, a lot of these people thought of themselves as very pious, but they've never. It would never cross their mind of just freeing the maid of bondage just for the sake of overcoming the obstacle. And why is that? And what happened? I mean, if it was when God called this the obstacle, did the early Muslims take it seriously? Okay, so we don't take it seriously, but was there a time where anyone took it seriously? And why does God swear by وَأَنْتَ حِلٌّ بِهَذَا الْبَلَدِ? You are here. And what's the juxtaposition? What's the contrast that God is alerting us to? And, so you have all these questions, and you write down, I would be in the habit of writing down the questions. And I would, and I remember writing Al-Aqaba and like having 10 different question marks and exclamation marks next to it. And then that is sort of all the research you're doing is directed at shedding light on that point. And yeah, I remember it was not like an aha moment, but it was a gradual thing where I became completely convinced that the ethic of the early Muslims was truly an ethic of liberation. That the slaves gravitated towards the Prophet Muhammad precisely because of what surah like Surah Al-Balad said. That when I found several references describing, this was not flattering, this was trying to demean the movement of the Prophet as the slave movement or the slave prophet, the prophet of the slaves. Then a lot of things start clicking. And that expression that we all learn but we never pay any attention to, من عبودية العباد لعبودية رب العباد, from slavery to human beings to slavery to the God of human beings, that Islam came to free people from the slavery, and then of course you need a great deal of reading to start understanding that the reports that try to give you the impression that followers of the close companions of the Prophet were okay with slavery. Like there's a very famous report that claims that Imam Ali had slaves. And then to then realize that this is not a politically neutral report. This was a report intended to demean Imam Ali. It is because the way it's told is as if it's neutral. But to have the courage to say, yeah, this is a political report, and just because Bukhari said isnad is fine, I'm not going to take it as historical truth, because it is so inconsistent with so many other things in that we know about Imam Ali. That's the journey, and that's the hard work. That's where the real work goes. But it is imperative. Any religion, because it is given to human beings. Human beings weaken before their egos, and it's not just that they weaken before their egos, but they're threatened by what is. Whenever there was moral uprightness that challenged human beings, you have a choice: either you transform or you degrade the moral challenge by degrading its significance, by saying that the person who's posing the moral challenge or the moral education is not important. Oh, they're not that significant. Oh, they're not that learned. Oh, well, it's not. And you discover that that's what human beings do repeatedly. And we have centuries of morally mediocre people who responded to the moral challenge by diluting the moral message, and to critically delve into the tradition to try to sort of identify what these mediocre people, morally mediocre people, did to the tradition and to cleanse it. It's like polishing something that is very valuable and to reclaim the jewel. That's where the hard work is, and that's where you must be anchored in the Quran and in the love of the Quran before you journey to truly recapture the message of the Quran. Because without Allah's aid, without Allah's answering your prayers, I would submit you have no hope of having that type of both courage and insight. It's a fool's errand. you're not going to get anywhere.
I mean, this is exactly why there's no words to express our gratitude, because, you know, especially if you read like this translation, and as you said, where you started out on this journey, where it's like, okay, you know, God isn't God the most just because God created human? You know, it's so simpleton, and yet, you know, we just accept that. But then we would have no means, you know, the vast majority of people would not have the means to do the hard work, to do the research, to have those questions, to, you know, have the bravery to express what they actually believe, to put up with all the people that, you know, would rather degrade the moral challenge than transform, which you are the receptacle of, you know, pretty much your entire career. And we just wouldn't have the ability to understand the Quran in this way and access it without what you've done. So, you know, and even like the idea, you know, because a lot of what you cover in the halakha is, you know, when we're talking even about slavery, I'm sure I'm not the only one who feels like when you hear the fact that, okay, it's not, slavery is not okay, this, you know, is so clear. When you hear in mainstream spaces, you know, people saying, oh, slavery was okay or whatever, and you know intuitively that's wrong, it means so much to hear you like say it, emphasize it, show us, teach us. You know, that helps elevate the confidence of our faith, and look, you know, and then also remind us to be able to look at things, or give us the permission to look at things like, okay, when you talk about freeing a slave, right, and all the different permutations of that in our world today. I mean, maybe arguably there are no more opportunities than any other time for anyone to free people from slavery, whether it's human trafficking or credit card debt, or, you know, giving people a place to live or feed people. You know, I mean, there's just so much we can do, and to give us that, you know, understanding that that is actually part of our tradition is to, you know, is so valuable. So anyway, I'm just to say, you know, sometimes it's like, it's important just to say like how important what you give us is. So thank you again. Let's open up to questions. Rami, you had a question, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
My question is just about the Sheikh skipped over verses 8, 9, and 10 in Surah Balad. I don't know if there's anything to say about those, but specifically my question is about وَهَدَيْنَاهُ النَّجْدَيْنِ.
Oh, I forgot about. Oh, yeah, I did forget. وَهَدَيْنَاهُ النَّجْدَيْنِ. Yes. Let's see the translation. But yeah, no, I'm happy you raised this. So let's. Yeah, I did forget وَهَدَيْنَاهُ. Okay, so just for the non-Arabic speakers, it says.
Thank you.
So this is ألم نجعل له عينين ولسانا وشفتين وهديناه النجدين. So didn't we? This is after Allah saying that human beings spend abundant wealth and they think that no one sees them, and then God poses this: have we not given human beings 2 eyes and a tongue and lips? And وَهَدَيْنَاهُ النَّجْدَيْنِ, Muhammad Asa translated, and shown human beings the 2 highways of good and evil. And then it says, you know, then it raises the issue of the Aqaba. So the Najdain, probably the reason that Muhammad Asa translates it as the 2 highways of good and evil is because in Najd is whatever is an elevated, whatever it refers to, whatever is a pronounced or elevated area. So the area in Saudi that's called Najd is, for instance, because the actual topography is elevated, the land is above sea level compared to the rest of Saudi Arabia. So, and najd is whatever, in other words, whatever becomes a marked path. So, وَهَدَيْنَاهُ النَّجْدَيْنِ is first, so you first Allah alerts you to like in Surah At-Teen, to um, the particulars of the way of human physiology, the eyes, the tongue, and so on. But then the Najdain, I would translate it, and we gifted human beings with the ability of moral choice. It is the moral choice between the path, and it doesn't say the 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 path of what, but the context is clearly either you take the path of overcoming the aqaba, of overcoming the obstacle, or the path of avoiding taking on the aqaba. I don't understand it because it doesn't say good or evil. It just says the moral choice. But the context, because it says right after that, فَلَقْتَحَمَ الْعَقَبَةِ. So you understand that there is a moral choice between taking on the aqaba, accepting the challenge and overcoming the challenge of the difficult challenge of freeing people from bondage, of treating the orphan as an orphan should be treated, of taking care of, in other words, those who are subordinated. Because human beings, I mean, and this is another thing that in reflections on Surah Al-Balad is I've just remembered in the times that I worked with community legal services and the times that I've done volunteer with human trafficking and so on. And even in the old memories of seeing maids in people's houses and, these little girls that, usually 9, 10 years old, and they're human beings always want to look at someone who is disempowered or dispossessed or as their sense of anxiety about weakness makes them want to believe that they're different. So I remember, like, when we were children, there was always the assumption that these little maids working in people's houses, that they're dirty, and it was completely classist. I mean, there was no basis for it. It was just the assumption is, well, they must be maids because there's something wrong with them, something that makes them different than us. And then I repeatedly, in working with immigrants who are, detained in detention centers, when I used to go to the detention center in San Pedro, or with people who were trafficked, and there's or people who, a lot of the or people who are drug addicts. There's always this. It's like taking on the moral obstacle. A lot of people choose the path of not handling the moral obstacle because handling that challenge fills them with anxiety. It is as if they need to assure themselves that they're different, that the whatever, like, it's like the superstitious beliefs that whatever curse that has befallen these people that turned them into sexual slaves or into maids or into or into drug addicts, well, that curse is not going to touch me. It's subconscious, but you really encounter it in the attitudes of people, and then then you reflect upon Allah through describing this as the obstacle, and you truly understand why Allah describes it as an aqaba, a true impediment to the path of moral progress, is to understand that you are them and they are you. And that but for the grace of God go I. That there, it is not because they're flawed or there's anything particularly bad about them, or they're you. It's just different circumstance. You could have been the maid or the sexual slave or the addict. Absolutely no difference. And so وَهَدَيْنَاهُ النَّجْدَيْنِ فَلَقْتَحَمَ الْعَقَبَةِ, and that expression, it falls upon you like a mountain, or I remember it fell upon me like a mountain, that Allah truly sort of knows that so the vast majority are going to choose the path of not wrestling with the Aqaba, because it is bruising and it fills them with anxiety, and that it is uncomfortable, and but persistently the people, and listen, it is impossible when you see a pattern of behavior from the followers of a teacher, it would be quite silly of you not to recognize that the pattern of behavior is due to this teacher. So when I see that everyone that followed the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ in Mecca became energized to take on these difficult social obstacles and paid quite often a heavy price for it. So when they thought to go, and they empowered the weak and they empowered the slaves, and they were willing to pay the price often of persecution, like being actually physically hurt and insulted and so on. That is like, follow the evidence. Then this man must have been performing a function that is energizing his followers to do X, Y, and Z. And if you are and again, decolonizing our tradition, then you as a responsible researcher must ask yourself, okay, I need to find the evidence of what this man was actually doing that were energizing his followers to take on these extremely uncomfortable challenges. Because I know that in just living in life, that it is a rare individual that will go on to take the cause of the disempowered and be willing to be ostracized and marginalized and even beaten and insulted, and for taking on that cause. So what was about this man and his teachings that were energizing people to do that? And that's a really important part of the story. But again, we don't pay attention. We don't tell the story of the Surah I think with the right type of critical questions that brings up the right type of moral narrative from the Sirah.
Of course, I have to plug then the Surah project. So definitely, that's our next project, inshallah. Inshallah, if we can raise the money to commit to that time period. So please check out our launchgood.com/project Illumine Sirah, SIRAH. Yeah, and I'm hesitating because I just let me make the comment here. I just got an email back from LaunchGood because we submitted it for review for it to qualify for zakah. And once again, because this happened last year when we tried to have the little marking on LaunchGood that, the tafsir project is actually worthy of zakah, and it required a lot of back and forth, and ultimately they corrected their view that, we are now encountering the same thing with the Surah project. So
That's not qualified
yeah,
for
that they
zakah?
told us that, decolonizing the Syria in the age of Islamophobia doesn't qualify for zakah, and then they give you a link to the description of what their zakah, terms are, and after a thorough evaluation of our program, that we don't qualify, although it says clearly that in Allah's cause is one of the things, and further that in Allah's cause is anything that addresses Islamophobia. And so anyway, it's a sad indication again of where we are, right? Because something so basic as needing to decolonize the traditions of the Prophet and educating people, if that's not Allah's cause, I don't know what is. And hopefully, inshallah, a little education will help that process. But anyway, just to say, please spread the word. It is definitely zakah eligible, verifiable, and it's so important, obviously. It's so important. Okay, let me ask. I have a question from Witsky. Question about Surah Al-Balad, Ayah 13. Does Raqaba clearly carry the meaning of a human neck, in quotes, or could one possibly interpret this to refer to the neck of an animal as well?
I think it could refer to the neck of an animal. And again, we have very little evidence of, before Islam, of sensitivity about the well-being of animals. And as I've said before, the Islamic civilization was the first to create awqaf for the caretaking of animals of all sorts. First in history. Awqaf for birds, awqaf for cats, awqaf for dogs, awqaf for old service animals, donkeys and horses, so that they don't end up just being put down. And what that type of ethic. Yes, there's both التراحم وتواصوا بالمرحمة, because there is no reason to think that al-marhama, compassion and mercy, is just towards human beings. It's towards everything that's living, and fakku raqaba as well.
Okay, we're good. Any last questions? Going once, going twice? Okay, thank you everybody. Thank you, Sheikh, for this unbelievably amazing evening with these two powerful surahs. It's really interesting because you didn't cover these two close together necessarily, either in the line by line
or in the original.
Yeah, so the fact that they came together through,
I
praying istikhara on it is pretty cool. So and now we know why. Now we see why. It's like,
SubhanAllah.
SubhanAllah. Alhamdulillah. Okay, everybody. And also, countdown to Ramadan is only like, I don't know, 3 weeks away or something like that, or less. So very exciting times. Thank you for joining us, and look forward to seeing you guys, inshallah, this coming week, or next Saturday, inshallah. Have a great
Assalamu alaikum.
week. Assalamu alaikum.